Khadgar versus Anduin.
The light shall bring victory.
Knowledge is power.
So as of today, we are still waiting for Overwatch to release. We are so close, but in the meantime I've been playing a bunch of Hearthstone, and since Whispers of the Old Gods came out and standard mode with it, I've not actually made any Hearthstone videos yet. So let's change that, starting with Reno Mage. I've made lots of Reno Mage decklist attempts myself in the past, none which have been fantastic, but have all been fun and kind of worked, but I decided to try a proven one. And this particular list that caught my eye from the competitive Hearthstone subreddit features a bunch of cards I never thought I would include myself. One of them in my hand right now, Flamelance. Never thought I'd include that in a constructed list. It's not a horrible card, but the 8 damage always struck me as a little excessive and situationally good against giants. But time to experiment. So this is a priest. We don't know what kind of priest. Any priest will run Wild Pyromancer, but what flavor is he?
Do you hear its call?
And now we know he's a Cthulhu priest, so typically I wouldn't mind taking things quite slowly against a priest, but a Cthulhu deck is going to be a bit more minion heavy. I'll need to be able to keep up with the board. My hand right now just doesn't really allow me to do that, and I'm forced to throw down a rather weak Acolyte that's not going to get any value. It's going to soak 3 damage, cycle 1 card. But playing it now doesn't mean it's not going to get Cabal Shadow Priested later, and perhaps I'll draw an option that I can play, such as a Healthy Minion, which is kind of a rarity in this deck. The options are Water Elemental, Twilight Drake, and Azure Drake perhaps against this board, but it's still not going to be too good. I end up drawing Twilight Drake, and while the Pyromancer is susceptible to a Fire Blast kill, I can't do a whole lot else besides play a weak MC tech, which may even come into play, but the Twilight Drake is easily the best option here. It's a difficult minion for Priest to deal with already, and his board just doesn't really deal with it too well, and after spending a long time thinking about it, he decides going face is the best option, and I think from that I can conclude he doesn't have Darkshire Alchemist in his hand to blast this thing for 5 damage. It would be a hell of a trade for him right now to hit it with Darkshire Alchemist and trade in the 3-1. And now I get the option again to ping the 3-1, maybe hit the Twilight Elder, but then I have no follow-up to that. I'm floating 4 mana. MC Tech again is quite weak. I decide to Blizzard and lock this Twilight Elder down for either a trade next turn, a Forgotten Torch kill, or maybe it drops into Flamestrike, or Geddon. There's a lot of options. But this Drake is clearly a problem for him, and I'm not that scared of the Twilight Elder. This again confirms that he doesn't have Darkshire Alchemist to heal this thing, because it is a healthy minion at this point. He goes all in on powered shielding it for draws, gets a rather wimpy 2-drop in Beckner of Evil, but he now has a 3-8, and a 3-8, it's not terrifying, but a priest healing such a healthy minion over and over eventually snowballs and gets problematic, so it's going to need to go some way or another. I feel that Flamestrike could get more value against a minion deck, and Forgotten Torch ping does beat the Twilight Elder, but it does cost me my Drake since his Beckoner can kill it for free, and with that the priest would have an open board and 7 mana to spend. I don't really want to deal with something like Twin Emperor right now with no board, and I figure now's a good time to make use of that 8 damage on Flamelance. I get a free kill on Beckoner this way, and I keep this pesky Twilight Drake that he's having trouble dealing with. And he does clear it this turn, but it's not in a very pretty way. He had Holy Nova, which would have killed it, but he wanted to draw more cards through Pyro and Nausea Cleric, and he's drawn a few cards. He did chuck down 2 powered shields last turn, skipping on mid-game minion turns, presumably because, like me, he didn't have any. I would have been shit out of luck if I didn't get Twilight Drake. But he is holding cards still, and I'm led to assume he's either got removal, such as Shadow of Death, Entomb, or he's already got Cthulhu in his hand, and I'm going to have a rough turn 10. However, his play has set me up for a perfect Baron Geddon sweep, which is even better because I finally get to play a beefy minion after having to rely on that Twilight Drake carrying me for a few turns. Now I'm curious to see if he does have that removal. Entomb wouldn't be good, not for his deck, and not against my deck. And Death would be good, perfect even if he had a 5-drop, which I concluded he definitely didn't have earlier. He certainly didn't have Alchemist, and would have definitely gone for a tempo Twilight Darkmender turn here if he had Death. But instead we see Cairn, and Cairn lines up okay against Geddon. It's not fantastic, but it does trade with it over 2 turns. And Polymorph as a draw is a great answer to Cairn. It's also fantastic against Cthulhu, which we'll be seeing soon. However, I'm pretty certain he doesn't have Shadow of Death, and Entomb is far too slow for what I'm about to do. Why not Alex's face and just bash him? Really, what is he going to do against this if my assessment of his hand is correct? Entomb cost too much to save him. Perhaps he felt he wasn't under enough pressure to cast Shadow of Death before, but what he's going to need right now is both Shadow of Death and Twilight Darkmender. But I came to a conclusion that last turn was the perfect Shadow of Death plus Twilight Darkmender, and thus doesn't have that combination of cards, and that's what made me go for this seemingly ballsy play, especially with the Antonidas Torch backing it up for even more pressure. If he, he has to remove a 7/5 and 8/8, he has to heal up. How would he ever deal with an Antonidas following up and generating an instant fireball? It's just too much pressure, and he gives in at 9 mana before that Cthulhu, suspected to be in his hand, could even have a say. And Twilight Drake is one of those cards I wouldn't have thought to include in my Reno Mage, because I can't confidently say my hand size is going to be healthy enough to support a healthy Twilight Drake on turn 4. But that game was definitely a plus for the Drake. It's always good against Priest, but it got me through a few rough turns where my hand was looking pretty grim, and I managed to kill quite a few minions with it, whilst it naturally dodged a lot of Priest removal. Next up was a Warlock, and the creator of the deck suggests keeping Ice Block in your hand, which shocks me, because it's totally not in my instinct to do that, since it's not proactive and generally something you'd want later on. But it has incredible synergy with Reno Jackson, and there's a lot of fast decks out there, and getting an Ice Block proc into Reno early game against a face deck is, well, it's probably going to win you the game a lot of the time, unless that face deck has so much face damage and hasn't run out of steam yet somehow. So, as expected, this Warlock is a Zoolock, and based on this, coin Darkshire Councilman, I think I'm already fucked. That card is nuts, and the earlier it gets down unchecked, the scarier it is, and probably game-ending. I could have forgotten Torched it this turn, but I went with Ice Block, and in truth, I'm watching this back and wondering how the game would have gone if I had Torched it and made it a 1/2 at this point, because a 4-drop that I play next turn could kill it. The problem is that Zoolock can kill off your stuff so easily, and both Twilight Drake and Water Ellie would have been at 6 health, which is really good. However, all it takes is Power Overwhelming, or some combination of Abusive Sergeant, plus a couple of Knife Juggles, Direwolf. Now, I'm not scared of Direwolf at this point, because, in truth, his positioning of his minions is awful for Direwolf. He's got his weenies on the outside and his healthy prime targets that he wants to keep alive in the middle. So, Direwolf, if you'd imagine his 1/1 and his 2/1 in the very center, Direwolf would be perfect. He would have 5 damage, so he'd only need 1 more. The Direwolf procs a Juggler from the Knife Juggler, then he has 2 more mana to play another 2-drop or 2 more 1-drops. The Knife Juggler's probably going to see off my Drake, right? And then what do I even do then? I've lost the game for sure. Instead he plays Argus, which again is a card that depends on minion positioning, and this positioning has let him down in that he's had to taunt his Knife Juggler, which he doesn't want. He doesn't want it exposed to my Twilight Drake. This turn for me is another one that I could have done differently, like turn 3. This turn I could have Flame Lanced the Councilman and just killed it outright, and my Twilight Drake could kill off the Knife Juggler. He'd have a 1/1, a 2/3, and a taunted 3/2, and that doesn't seem too bad. Instead, I went with stopping the bleeding by killing off the 2 taunts and freezing the Councilman for now, and that is risky in that I'm playing towards my top decks, because I was doing this hoping I'd draw Frost Nova to delay more, or Blizzard to simply kill them all. Despite how unlikely it is, it seems that the only way I come back is playing towards miraculous draws. I'm curious to see how it would have gone with the Flame Lance play. I just felt I would have fallen too far behind, so I went with the optimistic play. And in this turn, getting down Loot Hoarder instead of Fire Blasting a 1/1 is better, since he's going to get my Ice Block anyway. I may as well get something that draws a card and possibly freezes the board. Drawing the Flame Strike gives me hope, because I can play it next turn. My Ice Block will be gone and I'll be at 1 health. However, Zoolocks often don't have direct damage straight out of their hand. If they do, it's going to be a Doomguard or a Leroy. They don't run Soulfire, but they can pick it from Peddler, which he just played. So, I feel like Flame Strike can pull me back in. Except, he picked a really good pick from Peddler, and that Leponome shuts down my Flame Strike. I would have to top deck Reno Jackson, which I don't. So now my only option is to play Thalnos and ping it for a draw, and draw Frost Nova to lock the board down for 1 more turn. And then get Reno Jackson. That didn't happen, and that was almost never going to happen. It all began with the turn 2 Darkshire Councilman. Zoo is a nasty matchup. Not unwinnable, but if you're going to win it, it's going to take something like a huge Frost Nova Doomsayer turn, an early Reno Flame Strike. You're going to need to draw spectacularly because you know they will. But yeah, still curious to see how the game would have developed if I'd done those different plays I'd mentioned. But here we are at Paladin. Most probably N'Zoth Paladin. I am not finding any aggro Paladins anywhere, despite hearing that it has some potency. But yes, all the Pallies that I'm finding are playing heavy control, with lots of healing and N'Zoth. And this too is very, very winnable. There is a particularly big swing turn you can get against the big N'Zoth turn, which typically would be very difficult to deal with for most decks, but there is a neat trick. No need to play a Tempo Ooze here, because it's a slow matchup. And it's very rare to have to play a turn 2 Ooze these days for Tempo. It's such a weapon-heavy meta right now, with such important weapons that need destroying, special Doomhammer, and in lesser cases, Gorehowl. This deck actually runs 2 means of weapon destruction in the Ooze and in Harrison Jones, so we can hang on to the Ooze for now, and turn 3 you can safely play Arcane Intellect with no danger. Again, slow matchup, it's not a problem, and it gives us a really beefy Twilight Drake as a result. And the Paladin's options here aren't going to be fantastic. Aldor is not good against this since I crush a lot of recruits and he already has 2 recruits. Keeper's good, but he's still not going to be able to deal with the Drake this turn. And now I have options. I can go for the Ethereal Conjurer, which typically is very vulnerable, as it's such a low health minion for a 5-drop, but not that vulnerable to this board. It does trade with the 3-4, but even then that's not such a bad trade for me, and I can kill a recruit with the Twilight Drake. But I can also keep taking it slow, see off the recruits, develop Ice Block, and have a minion that threatens his keeper with the Fire Blast backing it. And if he wants to protect his keeper, one of his means of dealing with this Drake is True Silver Champion, which hopefully he plays because that gives me a perfect Harrison trait. Since taking away the True Silver, drawing a card, having a 5-4 lineup against his 3-4, and it's just awkward for him since it's not easy for a Paladin to deal 1 damage now that poor Muster for Battle is gone. Oh no! So, Harrison's a fine play here, and the Paladin, unless he has another True Silver Champion, is going to be kind of stuck. So, one of the interesting cards I like to think about each time I make a Reno deck myself is Jeweled Scarab. It's not in this person's list, but I like to think about it because, well, it's just a fun little card, you know? I mean, it's a bit of a weakling by itself and may cause you to fall behind against fast decks, but then again, it's a deck that doesn't have a lot of early game, and it gives you an early play, right? It may be a 1-1 on turn 2, but it also gives you the option to discover a turn 3 that can keep you in the game, where otherwise you won't always get such an option. The Scarab is interesting in that it varies in greatness for different classes, right? I mean, I think it's awesome for Shaman. Shaman has amazing 3-drops like Hex, Lightning Storm, Feral Spirits, Healing Wave. I mean, the versatility there is unreal. But for Mage, you're probably going to be discovering secrets. Frost Nova's a great one you could find. Forgotten Torch isn't too bad. And then, as I think about Jeweled Scarab, I start to think about Brand Bronzebeard, which is always lovely with Jeweled Scarab, but this list doesn't really have a lot of battle cries for something like Brand to synergize with. It has Ethereal Conjurer for the double discover, that's probably the best one. And then less so, you have Azure Drake, draws another card, it's okay, and Twilight Drake will generate a bit more health. Yeah, it's just simply not enough to have Brand, which is a shame, because it's a very cool card, but you'd have to change out too many cards for battle cries to make it happen. Things just ain't the same since Antique Healbot left. Such a glorious Brand combo. I do miss it. Another card worth thinking about with Reno Mage is Kabbalist Tome, which, due to our hand size, doesn't make it in this deck. If you see my hand right now, it's huge. And him being a slow control deck, this is the kind of matchup you'd think Kabbalist Tome would shine in, but where would I ever find the space to cast it when my hand size is like this? And this is not uncommon. So yeah, it's a little strange. 3 random mage spells. Pretty dang cool. Potentially infinite Kabbalist Tome chains, but understandably not making the cut. Now here was such a low pressure board, I decided to play Azure Drake and see if I can find one cheap spell like Frostbolt that I can combo with Antonidas, since I have Arcane Blast and Forbidden Flame, which will allow me to generate 3 instant fireballs with Antonidas, which is great. You want to try and generate as many as you can in the same turn you play him, else he'll get removed and you'll have lost a ton of value. It's very important to get a bunch of fireballs in matchups like this. Having Emperor Thaurissan will also help you out with that a lot, but I don't have him right now. I didn't get Frostbolt. It looks like I may be playing Antonidas next turn, since my hand is pretty dang clunky right now, and not only is he not putting on much pressure, he's also kind of panic healing with Forbidden Healing here, and having already seen one Equality and one Keeper of Older Men, I figure this is a good time to drop him. I'll just get 2 Fireballs and I can clear out the whole board as well, so it's just my Azure Drake and my Archmage, and perhaps he can't clear it. And we'll get to showcase Forbidden Flame, a new card alongside Kabbalah's Tome, Whispers of the Old Gods, and one that I was skeptical about, since it seems real mediocre, right? It doesn't pack a lot of punch for a mage spell, which are normally loaded with value, but the value comes in its flexibility, and especially flexible with Antonidas as a 0 mana spell, which you could just convert for a Fireball if need be. From here, I feel like I might just be able to go out and win with Fireballs to the face. I have spell damage on the board, and Antonidas may not even die. As I've said, he's burned 1 Equality Consecration already. 1 Keeper, 1 True Silver already gone. It turns out he's packing the old school Aldor Kodo, which is coming back in a big way. Kodo in general is finding its way into multiple Reno decks. It's even found its way into this one. But for Paladins, especially with the Humility combo, it's not a bad choice to have. After seeing that, I decide I'm going to stick with the same plan, since I can Blizzard. And with spell damage on the board, the Aldor will die. He'll have a 3-2. And I have 3 Fireballs to go face with. For this plan to fail, he's going to need a big-ass heal, and neither Ragnar's Lightlord nor Lay on Hands will cut it, since they'll set him at 19, and I have exactly 19 damage between the Drake's attack, the 2 buffed Fireballs, and my Fire Blast. He's going to need exactly Forbidden Healing, and he just got done playing the first one, so I am willing to take that chance that he doesn't have the second. And it turns out he does, and this game is going to go on a little longer, and I'll need to figure something out. Forgotten Torch is a fine draw to answer this Kodo, and I could play the Tempo Reno as a 4-6. Since Reno Jackson's heal is not very essential in this matchup, in fact it's probably better to play him just for having a 4-6 on the board. However, my threats are starting to dwindle, and he's going to be recovering, and soon he's going to have Tyrion, and I won't have Polymorph, and in an Azoth Paladin matchup, you have to Polymorph Tyrion, or you're going to have a bad time. Since the first one, you may be able to outlast the Ashbringer, and maybe then Reno's heal will be good. But how are you going to handle the second one post-Azoth? And here he comes to wreck my day. I need to draw Polymorph. I'm nearing the end of my deck and still don't have it. And my hand size is close to full. I've pretty much put myself in the deep end to digging for Polymorph here, and I'm going to have to drop one of these cards to be able to dig some more. If not for Polymorph, then at least for Frost Nova. So I'm going to ping the Acolyte one more time. It'll take me to 10 cards. I do not draw Frost Nova or Polymorph. I can get one more draw if I bash the Acolyte on the shield, but I do have to drop a card. And I am so hell-bent on getting Polymorph that I'm foregoing the threat of Ashbringer, and I'm going to play the Ooze and burst the True Silver. Oh Jesus. It looks bad. However, I have 18 health, I have Ice Block, I have Reno in hand, I'm not in danger of dying, and I don't have to Fireball Tyrion. I could play Water Elemental, and just continue to draw. And eventually the Polymorph will come. I can even freeze Tyrion if he gets a little heavy-handed and starts hitting me too hard. It'll lock him in place, and he won't get the Ashbringer. That's the important thing. Just don't let Tyrion die. Because the last thing I want is to enable him for N'Zoth. And if, God forbid, I don't draw Polymorph, I still kind of have an out with MCT. Because he's upgraded his hero power, he's generating 2 recruits at a time. Him having 4 minions out is not out of the question, and there it is, Tyrion, Sylvanas, and 2 recruits. So I now have a 50-50 of a really good mind control tech. Sylvanas is not the best, but I can work with it, and Tyrion is incredible. So it's pretty much my only option, since again I didn't draw Polymorph or even Frost Nova.
Engaging TC-130 mental dislocator.
Hey, you know what? Fuck you, Polymorph. You don't want me, I don't want you either. This is way better. Well, even with that insane pull, there's still the threat of Sylvanas taking it back. But Water Elemental is great at freezing Sylvanas. Because why deal with it now, when you can deal with it later? Or not at all. My board is packing serious damage right now, and I have 3 Fireballs in hand. The plan has shifted again, and I'm now looking to kill him next turn. You know, barring some freaky comeback? Nah, you know, that's pretty good. I'll give you that, but I do have an Ashbringer now. Polly. Can't even look at you right now. You know, how much more sustain could you really have? I'm gonna shoot you in the face with my dragon. This prevents him from playing N'Zoth because he hasn't had any taunts die for him, meaning that if he did play N'Zoth, I'd hit him in the face and double fireball. There's nothing he can do about it. I mentioned at the start of this match that there was a trick for a very big swing turn, and that not all classes have a very good means for dealing with the N'Zoth turn. In my case, Flame Strike doesn't always cut it, right? All you need is a Doomsayer, and 5 direct damage, so something like a fireball. And lastly, you'll need to make sure that they had a Sylvanas who died and got resurrected by N'Zoth. When that N'Zoth turn comes, you drop Doomsayer, kill Sylvanas and have her take the Doomsayer to his side of the board where he can't react to it, and it'll kill everything that N'Zoth brought back. Now he may have the initiative since he'll have the clear board post Doomsayer, but N'Zoth is generally their last stand. The only thing they'll have left to fight with are the death rattles from the minions that died. So we're talking Bane Bloodhoof, a Slime from Infested Tauren perhaps, and a damaged golem. I think you win from that point. On a similar note, since Tyrion Fordring got dealt with without the polymorph, I was able to turn Ragnaros into a sheep and go face with Alex. Drop Emperor Thorsan with a hand of Thalnos and 3 fireballs, that's 21 damage out of hand. And there's nothing he can do. Lay on Hands is the only heal he has left, and that will set him at 23, but he won't be able to clear my stuff. Not to mention Fatigue will get him. Alternatively, he spends the mana clearing my board, and he can't heal. This time, the 3rd time of asking, I could go in for the kill, knowing that nothing he could do would save him. He opts to clear the board, and I don't even need the Thalnos at this point. The N'Zoth Pally matchup has been really good in my experience. They don't show up that often compared to other decks, particularly the fast ones, but they do show up. And it's nice to be able to beat them because they can really draw out the game. And when a game is going to go 15, maybe even 20 minutes plus, it would suck to lose. And speaking of losing, I'm just kidding. Shamans these days are kind of horrible to face, but not unbeatable despite how absurd some of their cards are these days. Shush, phone. Their early game is quite vicious, with Tunnel Trog into Totem Golem happening more often than it should. Do I sound bitter at all? Well, anyway, you're going to need some fast early game yourself, and you don't really have a lot to choose from. That does mean throwing away Acolyte of Pain in search of cards like Doomsayer and Frostbolt. I get a Doomsayer, but even then, it's not entirely obvious how I'm going to play it out as player 2, because he has the initiative playing Tunnel Trog. So what do? Do I coin out Doomsayer right now? Because Tunnel Trog simply has to go, and it's the most likely time a Doomsayer will go off without dying. Or do I save it for a natural turn 2? Maybe he doesn't have the Totem Golem. Okay, he has the Totem Golem, of course, but maybe he doesn't have the means to kill it when I drop it this turn. I mean, what are the chances that he actually has the damage, right? Sometimes oh, no, let me tell you, he does. Anything in that deck. Rockbiter, Lightning Bolt, Lava Burst if necessary, Flame Tongue Totem, and he could even pass the turn without direct damage and just have a 2 Overload card, right? He could play Ancestral Knowledge and draw if he wanted to. Or he could play Feral Spirits, that's the worst one, and he'll have the 2 Overload on the Tunnel Trog and Doomsayer's dead. Turns out he plays Flame Tongue Totem, which is horrific in itself. Flame Tongue Totem is something that needs to be gone immediately, even if it looks like the Totem Golem. And even the Trog itself represent more damage. That thing is worth 4 damage at the least. When minion combat becomes involved, it's worth more, because the minions slide over into it and gain a buff each time. It's worth more damage if he's running charges like Argent Horse Rider. Yeah, overall, it's an ugly sight. And he's got a second one down now. Now, I don't feel too bad here, because I have 3 good targets for my control tech. The single best one is the Totem Golem. The Tunnel Trog may seem okay, but it would cause his Air Totem to shift over and be worth 2 damage, while taking the Totem Golem would take away his strongest minion and kill half the Flame Tongue for this turn, since there would be a gap on the side of it. And a 3/4 would be good for fighting his board. I end up just taking the Flame Tongue away from him, which is okay. It's not great in the sense that it doesn't actually do anything for me. It'll die for free, and my MCT will just be a 3/3 again, which is bad against his Totem Golem. However, I do effectively just kill his second Flame Tongue Totem, and given how his board looks right now, I am glad there is not a Flame Tongue sitting in that lineup. And as expected, he kills the Flame Tongue for free and decides to take the favorable trade on the 3/3. So, he's overloaded for 2. I know he can't play Bloodlust. However, he can still lethal me with Lava Burst, which would be exactly 19 damage. And while I do have Ice Block in my hand, it's not going to be enough. I need to draw Reno and freeze. I do draw Reno, and most notably, I do it with Arcane Intellect, not Acolyte of Pain. Acolyte is slow, and he has a means of one-shotting it, giving me only 1 card. Arcane Intellect is immediate, and I draw 2 cards guaranteed. You need to be very fast in this matchup, so if the fast option's there, you should take it. Now, Forbidden Flame will deal 2 damage to the Totem Golem, given my 2 mana, but if I coin, I can deal 3 damage and kill the most vicious target there, the Tunnel Trog. That's the one that'll give him lethal with Lava Burst plus Rockbiter. Killing Golem would still leave me susceptible to that. Doing this, I'm not going to die and I don't have to play Ice Block. And the longer you can hold off on having the Ice Block down and having it popped and having to Reno, the better, because you draw more stuff, of course. That means you draw more answers and ways to stabilize, like freezes and Area of Effect. So, buying myself precious time. He took a really slow turn there at 4 mana. This tells me that he definitely doesn't have Flame Wreath Faceless, which is a godsend. And even without Flame Wreath Faceless, you can see the beatdown I was facing, with just purely from the Trog, Totem Golem, and the 2 Flame Tongues in the opener, and then these Feral Spirits. And that in itself, right, that he hasn't played a Flame Wreath Faceless yet, and I'm still under this much pressure, just goes to show how scary this deck really is. But at 6 mana there, I didn't have an option but to play Ice Block that turn, but it let me get that Acolyte down without fear of dying. And I'm still not dead. Now this is huge, right? It tells me he doesn't have the direct damage in his hand to pop it, but most importantly, it gives me another turn to play fearlessly without worry of dying under the safe veil of Ice Block. It means I can spend this turn dealing with the board, and the Flame Strike is perfect. It kills everything and spends all the mana to do it. It's wonderful. Now, since all his damage has gone off the board and I concluded he didn't have direct damage in his hand last turn, I have a good chance of not getting killed this turn, unless he top decks Lava Burst. He had 2 draws with the start of turn and the Azure Drake, but he doesn't get a Lava Burst, and I get yet another turn of being able to play fiercely, and this is the most interesting turn of them all in my opinion. Of all the options here, actually it doesn't even seem like there's that many. Twilight Drake, Fire Blast, maybe I play Ooze for tempo, because I have Harrison Jones for Doomhammer anyway. I decide the best one is actually the scary one, Baron Geddon, and Arcane Blast on the 4/4 leaves him with a 1/1. Now, it sets me at 2 health, which is terrifying. Baron Geddon being up means I kind of have to Reno next turn, right? Otherwise Baron Geddon's going to kill me through my own Ice Block, if my Ice Block is still there, which it could be. If the direct damage is still not in his hand yet, then the 1/1 alone is not enough. If I am indeed playing Reno Jackson next turn, which it looks like I am currently, it looks like I'll have no choice, then I should pray that in this turn he plays Doomhammer, right? Because that's the only card currently that I could play in combo with Reno Jackson. I don't really want to have to Fire Blast a 1/1. That's not too great. Instead of Doomhammer, we see 2 horrifying creatures, the Thing from Below, and finally a Flame Wreath Faceless. At long last has shown his face? I think... no, technically not, I guess. Well, Reno, surely. Actually, that's not my only option. Baron Geddon doesn't have to kill me if I kill Baron Geddon. He has a great trade right now, and my Ice Block will still be here for another turn, meaning I can continue to play fearlessly and dig for answers and means of stabilizing. I get down a 4/4 and a 4/5. That's pretty good. I actually missed something there. I top decked the Frostbolt, which meant I could have Frostbolt pinged the 5/5 taunt and ran my Baron Geddon into the 7/7. I wish I'd seen that, but I thought, hey, this was great. I get down 2 minions and spend all my mana. This is fantastic. I just kind of rushed it in my excitement. And surely that was a much better play, and I wish I'd taken it. So we'll see just how much that costs me. He ends up Master of Evolutioning his 7/3 into the reverse, a 3/7 Shadow Pen Rider. 7 health is really tough for me to remove. And finally, my Ice Block goes down, and all these turns I managed to not play Reno Jackson. Look how much I got done in terms of card drawing and answering and stabilizing. A lot of stuff. The Shaman is almost out of cards, and it was all because of the safety that Ice Block guarantees, and it's such a strong synergy that only Mage can possibly make a deck out of. The interaction between Ice Block and Reno Jackson is magnificent, and this is such a tough board, and he's so out of cards. And I have 2 answers to Doomhammer. I feel that I should play Ooze here. This Ooze will let me contest that awkward 3/7 and even that 4/5 depending on how these trades go, since I have the Frostbolt to add to it, and that will give me the reach to kill anything on this board. Now, his last 2 cards were Tunnel Trog and, unfortunately, Feral Spirits. He manages to put a lot of stuff on the board, more than I can actually handle. I have 2 instant answers to minions in my hand. That's Kodo and Frostbolt, and the ping will let me deal with the 1/1, if he decides to keep it alive. He doesn't, he trades it away. Despite me being at max health, I'm suddenly in a really tough and quite frightening position with 1 minion versus his 6. I have to get a good stomp here and hit one of the wolves. It's a 2 out of 3 chance. I quite fancy it too. However, he decides to go for the totem, so he's going to have another 2/3 going into his next turn. And now I've got the decision on what to Frostbolt. The 3/3, which can scale in damage, or the 4-2, which is 4 damage right now and threatens my Reno Jackson, and based on that, I think it needs to be the 4-2. And the ping, for me there's only one option, that's the Shadow Pan Rider, since as a 3-4, it comes under threat from my Reno Jackson, or the Kodo, plus ping. And from this point on, I'll admit, the game becomes a total slog. The interesting part is over, and that was surviving the initial onslaught. At this point, we're both kind of top-decking, and it's still 50-50 to me, because he may not have a hand, but my hand is actually just useless right now. And I'm just waiting to top deck Antonidas plus a spell like Frost Nova, or for him to play Doomhammer so that I can just take it away from him and draw a bunch of cards that'll just close the game immediately. Blood Mage is a draw that's not great, but I can drop it, and I have the option to ping it right now for an immediate draw, but I don't think I'll play anything too meaningful right now. And I can spend this turn polymorphing the Trog, which is quite threatening. And at this point I'm only playing around top decks, right? The only meaningful polymorph targets are Flame Wreath Faceless, yeah, and Thing from Below. Okay. Fine. I do feel like shit now. Well, at least I get to play with 2 draws this turn. Loot Hoarder kind of sucks. And Frost Nova is not worth casting, but it is nice to have for when I do draw Antonidas. It's a card I can play immediately with Antonidas, and locking down his board with Antonidas plus Freeze is generally a game-winning play in itself, if he can't deal with it from his hand. So come on, either my Archmage or his Doomhammer. Let's go, let's do it. So, thinking about another card that I've thought about with the Reno Mage, it doesn't seem like a very strong card by itself, but it's Twilight Flamecaller, 3 mana 2/2, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, right? So it's like Arcane Explosion, just a minion at 3 mana. I was quite excited to try it. It just turned out that when I did try it, the 2/2 body is really not that good, and the battlecry isn't strong enough to kill enough things, right? It's a card designed to be played against fast decks, right? The problem is the fast decks, the minions have 3 health. You know, you look at the Shaman, the Tunnel Trogs, the Flame Tongue Totem, the Manatite Totem, the Feral Spirits. Totem Golem has 4 health. Doesn't seem too bad against Zoo. It hits Abusive Sergeant, the Tentacles, and Possessed Villager. And we have a few 2 health minions where the ping on top of the Flamecaller can see it off. But it does become more considerable if you're playing the Battlecry Discover heavy Reno Mage, because you're running Bran, and Bran Flamecaller would be 2 instances of 1 damage to all minions. That becomes a lot better. And finally Doomhammer shows up, and it's better for me to this Shaman's distress. And I am getting close to fatigue by playing Harrison here, of course, but that's not a concern to me when the other option is leave a Doomhammer in his hands and don't draw any cards. Yeah, there's no contest. And out of all the cards that I draw, I decide that Frost Nova needs to be kept for Antonidas next turn, and the best play is Ethereal Conjurer, and out of these Conjurer picks, a second Frost Nova I think is the best pick, since locking down the board 2 turns in a row is surely going to grant me victory. The Conjurer is a weak minion, but his board is already quite weak, and he'll have a hard time actually dealing with the 6/3. He has Rockbiter in his hand, which is all the more reason to take Doomhammer away from him before he can double up on that card's damage. And I've got my game plan very much set in stone. There's only a little more decision making to be done here, provided that he can't answer me with something like Hex. And while I am pretty confident in what I'm going to do, I still take my whole turn thinking about it, since I have just drawn up to a 10 card hand and the options are very much wide open. But after a while I conclude that there's nothing he can do. If I get the Antonidas freeze into either a Fireball Chain or another freeze next turn if necessary, using that second Frost Nova that I decided to take from Ethereal Conjurer's Discover. From here it's straightforward. The only decision I decide to make is I don't attack the Stoneclaw Totem with Harrison Jones, because perhaps that 7th minion slot could be valuable. Like, he could play something directly from his hand, like Alakir, maybe. It's such a rarity, but why even play into it when I don't need to? And even if there was no miraculous 7th minion that he could play, he can just guarantee another Stoneclaw Totem anyway, because it's the only totem remaining. To me, there's simply no point in attacking this, so I don't. And it turns out that game plan ended up leading to victory, which is wonderful. That was a bit of a roller coaster of a match for me to play. And that was some Reno Mage and a nice sample of 4 very different matchups. I'll try and weave in a bit more Hearthstone between all the Overwatch. That'll be soon to come once the game is out. For now, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye for now.